I'm live. Welcome to the Unknown Packers podcast. And for those of you that don't know me, I'm Brice Christianson. And for those that do know me, it's good to see all of you again. Good to see all of you again. You might be wondering, especially for those that have been following the Unknown Packers podcast since its inception back in 2017, and then our abrupt stop back in, I believe, the beginning of November. So it's been about a 2-month hiatus. And this episode is me talking about that abrupt ending, me talking about a lot of things, and moving forward, we'll see what happens. But I wanted to give you all, for new fans and old fans, supporters, I wanted to give you all just sort of a snapshot into my mind, into things that have been going on, things that I've been thinking about. And this is going to be a new format. And my hope is that moving forward, we'll see. We'll see. I'm a believer in one day at a time. And instead of saying for those that know and those that don't know, what I will say is, so I've been a recovering alcoholic for going on 3 years. It'll be 3 years, February 4th. And I started this podcast in 2017, and it's 5 years we've been doing this. There's just been a lot of change. How the podcast came to be is not really what I had envisioned. And to be honest, when you're looking at 2022 right now, who thought we'd be living this life right now? And when I decided to take a break and a hiatus, I informed Ken Ingalls and Niebels, who were the co-hosts, that I needed to take a break. And my hope was that could continue on without me until I would come back. And I'll be honest, when I decided to pull the plug and take a break, a hiatus, I told a couple people that I didn't think I would ever record again. I was hanging up my cleats, if you will. And so now I'm back. Don't call it a comeback. But I've been wrestling with a lot of stuff up here and here, and I'm sure all of you have as well with this pandemic. Now with the Omicron, and I'm not going to talk about the variant and the pandemic, but it had a profound impact on me, and I'm sure it has a profound impact on everyone across the globe. For me, I will say that I decided to excavate more, and I decided to lean in a little bit more on the discomfort of me and my journey. And I've always just been a lifelong learner. I've always put myself under the microscope, and I've always just tried, or I should say I am focusing on always just trying to get better with my relationships, with my friendships, who I hang out with, how do I spend my time. And for a while, the podcast, it was a chore. And I'm sure, just like anything, it's work. And when I decided to start this podcast back in 2017, I'm going to lean back a little bit. When I decided to do this podcast back in 2017, my mindset was so different. I was drinking heavily. I was really involved in beer trading, the New England style IPAs, FOMO, the latest, greatest beer release. And little did I know that it was a slippery slope into, alcoholism. And I had always known that I had a very interesting relationship with alcohol. And coming from a long line of alcoholics on both my parents' side, I sort of was proud that I could handle my drinking. And in a state like Wisconsin, drinking's a birthright. especially going to Lambeau Field, especially going to Green Bay. It's a birthright. It's what you do. And I bought into that. And so I'm sharing this right now because when I started this podcast in 2017, compared to now, I'm a totally different person. Initially, the whole point of starting the podcast was for me and Jeremiah Wayman, my other brother from another mother, the original co-host, was really just to get together, drink beers, and talk about the Green Bay Packers. We did that at Black Husky Brewing. That they became our unofficial sponsors. And every week, every Wednesday, I and myself and Jeremiah would record in the brewery. And it got to the point where I was drinking every day. I was hungover, and it was affecting my marriage. It was affecting my friendships. It was affecting my work. And my marriage is obviously the most important thing, but more importantly, or on the same wavelength as my marriage, my relationship with me. And I never really thought about where I'd be right now, to be honest. I'd contemplated suicide a couple times when I was younger, when my parents were getting divorced, or even before my parents got divorced. I grew up in a household that I was physically and psychologically abused. And it got to the point where I thought this was my life. Like every day I'm going to be psychologically abused or physically abused. And it got to the point where I didn't want to live anymore. And I had contemplated suicide a couple times, and then my parents got divorced. And then my life got better, so it seems. But those scars, those bruises, they stay. But the one thing, throughout my entire life is I've always been a Green Bay Packers fan. And I'll talk a little bit more about how I became a fan and my relationship with my father, which we have an estranged relationship. I'll talk about that a little bit more. But when I started to drink heavily and really getting into the craft beer scene, there were moments where I'd black out and I'd wake up the next day and there'd be a noose. I'm not proud of it, but and then there would be moments where and the noose would be, a belt or something like that. And it started happening a little bit more frequently. And I got caught by my wife. And the next day, my wife had said, "Do you remember what happened last night?" And it was blurry, it was spotty. And she's like, "You wrapped a belt around this pipe downstairs, and I saw it. Like, what were you doing?" And, at that moment, I knew, like, I was either going to die by my own hands, or I needed to get help. And there are a lot of people that have gone to rehab, that have done a lot of different things. For me, I knew I needed help, and I knew I needed to stop, but I continued to drink a little bit. And it was just moments of blacking out and driving drunk and all this other stuff that I became emotionally just drained. And after the Super Bowl, I think it was the Rams and the Patriots, I made a complete ass of myself at my wife's company party, blacked out, all this stuff. Said some awful things to her. And I woke up the next day just hungover and covered in piss and vomit. And I realized this is it. And miraculously, I quit so far. And I promise this will be a little bit more lighter, but I want you all to know, like, me and how this ties into the abrupt ending of the Unknown Packers podcast back in November. And so I quit drinking in 2019. And what I started to realize were all these emotions, all this trauma that I had just buried away, that I drank away. All these interactions that I had. I always wanted to be liked. I wanted to be a people pleaser. And I'm still dealing with that, pleasing people. And I don't want to like start being a dick to people, but I want to stop just pleasing people for the sake of pleasing people. Being nice, like I want to be kind to people always. But who do I interact with? How do I spend my time? Are the people that I spend my time with, do they care about me? Is it a two-way street? And I'll say for a while, I haven't really felt that. And that's something that I've been focusing on more and more. And how the podcast was it was going to be me and Jeremiah. We drink beers. We talk about the Green Bay Packers. And I got it in my head that we were going to be the best podcast ever. We were going to compete with Cheesehead TV, Pack-A-Day, blah, 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 all that stuff. And I want to say Pack-A-Day podcast, they started right around the same time that we started. And that is dangerous. When you start chasing that carrot that's dangling in front of you, you start doing things not for you, but for others, or you do it for your ego. And that's something that I also was struggling with. Will I come back and record again? Will I do a podcast again? Because there's an egotistical nature to podcasting. Like, listen to me talk, which I'm doing right now. But what I decided was that it can be cathartic, it can be therapeutic, and it can be a hobby for me. I can go back to the basics of what I want to do. And I honestly want to talk about my life. I want to talk about things that are going on, and I want to talk about the Green Bay Packers. It's not going to be a Green Bay Packers podcast. That'll be, the essence, which is sort of contradictory, but I want to talk more about my journey, and hopefully it helps others. So I want to be a service to other people, and I'm jumping around, and once the podcast started gaining some attention, we started getting some more views and stuff. It was getting exciting, and Jeremiah had a kid, and then he couldn't record as much. So then I started hosting by myself, and which is great. I love Jeremiah. I love his family, his kid, QB1, Augie. And that's what happens in life. But then I started going outside of like what it was supposed to be, just talking about the Green Bay Packers and just having a good time. And then it got into a business of a podcast production company, all this stuff, and started bringing team members on that it was more of like, how many likes and how much attention can I get? Unknown Packers podcasts are going to be the next biggest thing, and starting to compete with the Cheesehead TV and all that other stuff. And that's where I lost sight of why I started the podcast to begin with. And what's interesting is, 5 years ago to now, I still want to talk about the Green Bay Packers, but I want to do something different. And so we'll see what happens moving forward. But I needed to get this off my chest. It's been bothering me because I pulled the plug abruptly, and I was hoping to make, a comeback and record again with the guys, and I needed to take time. And so once we grew the team, and then it didn't really gel, either team members left or we let go of team members. It was just myself and Niebles, and then we brought on Ken Ingles. Ken was an original fan of the Unknown Packers podcast, and that's how we connected on Twitter. And Ken being the brilliant mind and also getting along with him, I wanted him to be a part of the podcast. And this was all during the pandemic. And the pandemic really helped me distract, right? I should say it helped me. I was distracted. I was allowed to be. What word am I? It distracted me from what was going on. And every day of sobriety, at least for me, is an opportunity to grow and heal. Like, why did I drink in the first place? All that stuff. Why did I drink to heal? And what I realized is I transferred. I transferred the alcoholism to the podcast, and that became my new addiction. And who was going to be the next guest? And we were going to be this next great thing, and we were just going to keep on compounding. And I lost sight of myself and my journey. And that's what I meant, like in the beginning, is like that was the most important thing, or is the most important thing, is my mental health and my wellness. And I always used to think that was selfish. And there's this quote that I stumbled across by the great McConaissance, is by being selfish, you can then be selfless. And that really stuck with me. Like and it's not by being greedy, being arrogant, pompous, or anything like that, but by taking care of oneself, you can then be of a service to others and be more present. And that's what I've been focusing on more and more. So I pulled the plug in November after really, I would say about 9 months to maybe a year of it just being a chore. My heart wasn't in it. My mind wasn't in it. But I love talking with Niebels and I love talking with Ken. But it did feel different. I'll be honest. I didn't feel like myself. I felt like every time we recorded, like I had to prep, I had to structure, I had to do all these things. And then it was like we had to get guests. And then that became a chore. And granted, it's not easy doing a podcast, but I want the podcast to be a creative outlet for me. I want it to be a hobby. And so when I pulled the plug, the goal was just, let's see what happens, and let's hope that, Niebels and Ken can carry on. And after a couple weeks, Niebels approached me and said, like, can't host and we should pull the plug. And that hurt. But again, I get it. As being the host for 5 years, I get it. When the host steps down, it's tough. And with the pandemic and everything, the political climate in general, everyone's stressed out. People are checked out. I don't want to check out. This is the world we're living in, and I'm going to navigate that world. And I'm going to do it to the best of my ability. And that's the journey that I've been focusing on. And so, I'm so grateful for what this podcast has given me the last 5 years. And I met incredible people like Niebels and Ken. And you might be wondering, like, oh, why didn't you come back and record an episode with all three of them? I needed to do this for me. I needed to, like, talk to you all. And that's why I'm doing it differently right now, is like I'm doing a YouTube live that I'm then going to edit and produce and put it up on all the other podcast platforms. And then I'm also going to interpret it into ASL. And so with the podcast, I never thought I'd be coming back. But it's interesting, like how I talked about, I want to interact with people that, like, I feel like are cut from the same cloth. And I've been really searching for that lately. And I have an incredible wife who's stuck by me. And the one thing that I'm so grateful for is that I had an opportunity to reconnect with her, fall in love with her again. And so, while my relationship with myself and my mental health is important, that's paramount. And I wanted to take some time to kind of just sit back and not have to worry about every single week recording, promoting, pumping, likes, follows, blah, 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 blah. So right now I've got a case of the I don't give a fuck. And that's not about like checking out of life and all that stuff, but I don't give a fuck anymore about whether or not people enjoy this podcast. I'm so worried about, like, what do people want to hear? And granted, the audience, like, they're the reason why podcasts are successful. Moving forward, I want this podcast to be an opportunity just to reflect, talk about stuff. And of course, we'll talk about the Green Bay Packers. Packers fan. No worries. Yerba mate. So I probably glossed over some stuff. But I started doing the podcast for other people and competing, the rat race. It's so fucking nauseating. And now you go on Twitter and it's just an echo chamber. And everyone that's tweeting stuff out, it's not authentic. I mean, there are some people, like some accounts, that's authentic. Like Ken Engels, like that's authentic. Like that salary cap, that stuff is real. But for a lot of like stuff that like I see on Twitter, it's regurgitation. It's someone seeing something else and then twisting it around and then posting it and seeing how many likes they get and all that stuff. And so I needed to check out, because for 5 years, that's all it consumed me, was how to get more followers, how to get more likes, how to generate more listens and downloads and all that stuff. And I don't want to do that anymore. So the case of the I don't give a fuck, I'm going to talk about my musings on life, current affairs, mental health, addiction, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the Green Bay Packers. It's not going to be a stat dump. It's not going to be the X's and O's and breakdown. It might, maybe. But I just wanted to have an opportunity to just open up and talk with you all. And there's a sign in American Sign Language of doing this. And so open up your heart. It's, putting your heart out there and being open. And for the longest time, I just lied to people. Internally, I just was miserable. And this goes back to, my childhood and growing up, is that I never healed. I thought I healed, but I never really truly healed. And what this pandemic has allowed me to do is it slowed me down and it's made me look in. And there's been so much change within me personally. I mean, obviously, like what's going on. But there's been so much change. And for a while, it was overwhelming. And I was just white knuckling it, trying to get through, trying to keep up with two businesses. I have Brice Christianson interpreting, and I have play-by-play sports interpreting, pxpsports interpreting and accessibility services. My relationship with my wife, friends, and family. And the podcast just became something that was annoying for me. Which I'm sure, like, for like Niebels and Ken, if you're listening, I'm sorry. I really, really am. It had nothing to do with you. It was more of just like how I lost myself. And so now I just want to get back to the roots of why I started this podcast, was just to talk about the Packers. But now I'm realizing, because about a month ago, I was on this podcast called Allied, and it's this accessibility podcast. And they were talking about my work with the Milwaukee Bucks and pxpsports interpreting. And I sort of threw a curveball and got real deep and raw and honest about my upbringing and how I was my dad's caretaker, essentially. Like, I was my dad's interpreter. Like, growing up, that's what I did. I was his key to the hearing world. And for all those that don't know, my father is deaf and he's been in and out of prison. And for my safety and my family's safety, I haven't seen him in over a decade. And for a while, I always thought like I was okay. And really the pandemic, and then also sobriety and being real clear-headed, not smoking weed or doing all this, being really clear-headed. And this escapism. And so what I've noticed more and more are these just thoughts would crop up. And rather than run away or anything like that, I leaned in. And that's when like I realized I need to take a break. And so for the past 2 months, I've been healing more so. And I think I've come out the other end better, more well-rounded, more subjective. I'm going to definitely focus on how do I occupy my time? How do I spend my time? Who do I hang out with? one of the things, one of the knocks, if you will, is I've always been considered like a Pollyanna, this eternal optimist, and I do have optimism. But I realized like how optimistic I was is because I was ignoring like what was truly going on. And so this pandemic really allowed me to lean in and heal and get better. I had an awful, awful childhood. And before I would never even think about talking about that with anybody, ever. And this podcast, Allied Podcast, it felt good. And once that released, and once I realized I actually enjoy talking like this, I enjoy, and as I'm like looking, because I've got the webcam and then I'm looking down at YouTube, so I feel like I'm looking down at you. But that's where I started to think, it can still be cathartic, and it can still help me, and then maybe it'll help others. So moving forward, we'll see. But this whole, like, I'm going to commit to every week episode, because if not, I'm going to lose some followers. I'm going to lose some listeners. Oh, no. I'm done with that. And for those people that are into that, to each their own, and more power to you. And by all means, like, this is my journey. But it became cringeworthy. It just became, I just felt like every time I recorded, I was being fake. I couldn't tell you all what was really going on about, like, because it was a Green Bay Packers podcast. I couldn't tell you what was really going on. Like, how I want to, like, talk about the Green Bay Packers. Because I work in professional sports. And I want people to respect me. And then I started thinking about, like, well, why can't this be an extension of PXP Sports Interpret? So that's the goal. I'm going to do these episodes, and then I'm going to interpret them into ASL. And it'll be an extension of PXP Sports Interpret. Excuse me. So, so that's a little bit about me, and I'm going to still talk about stuff. There's going to be an overarching theme about my childhood and my relationship with my father, my mental health, my addictive personality. And when I quit drinking, it was, I couldn't go to Black Husky anymore. And not that, like, they weren't welcoming. It's just things change. You're different. Things are different. And there was a lot of shame. A lot of fucking shame. And it doesn't matter what people say to you. My wife was so supportive, is supportive. And my wife still drinks. I mean, she's not a raging alcoholic or anything like that. And, like, okay, so, like, what's our marriage like now that, like, because we used to do everything, brunches and drink, like, everything revolved around drinking. And much like Wisconsin culture, everything revolves around drinking. And so there was a time where I was like, do we like each other? Are we going to get along? Because I'm different. And thankfully, we've come out the other end stronger. That's something that, not going to get emotional, but something that I cherish. And I'm so, so grateful that we're thick as thieves and we're still going strong. And but again, one day at a time. And that's what I want to focus on, is one day at a time. And who do I hang out with? And how do I spend my time? My friends. And I've said that over and over again. And it wasn't until a few weeks ago I had a conversation with a good friend of mine. We went to high school together. We ran cross country together, reconnected. And we actually, like, we're into the whole beer drinking or craft beer drinking, all that stuff. Ben Lenox, Cheese Curd Sports on Twitter. And we were talking a couple weeks ago. We were watching the Badger Bowl game. And he had asked me, like, hey, why did you stop doing the podcast? And I just told him, like, I can't talk about the Green Bay Packers the way I want to talk about the Green Bay Packers, because I'd like to work with the Green Bay Packers. And I want to work with other sports teams outside of just the Milwaukee Bucks. And Aaron Rodgers is a part owner of the Milwaukee Bucks, so I'm not going to talk about my true feelings or opinions because I want people to respect me. And man, he cut right through it. And he talked about this episode, and I think it was the last episode that I did with Ken Ingalls, or maybe it was Niebels, I can't remember. But how I talked about going to Lambeau sober. And it was a Washington football team game, and I talked about my buddy Chris, who sits next to me at Lambeau, who is a huge Unknown Packers podcast fan. And in the back of my mind, I've always just felt bad because he told me, like, every week I tune into you. I get to stay connected to you. And that meant a lot. And then I pulled the plug and I cut the cord because that's how mental health and that's how anxiety and depression work for me. I have to just fucking step away. But Lenny, Ben Lenox, call him Lenny, was like, you have no idea, you talking about being sober at Lambeau Field, coming from where you used to drink all the time at Lambeau Field and get fucked up and all this stuff, and now you're sober at Lambeau Field and talking about that perspective. And how much my story impacted him. And that was the seed. That was the seed that was planted. And from there, I've just been thinking about, okay, if I make a comeback, sounds so arrogant, if I make a comeback. But if I come back and do this podcast, things are going to be different. And I don't know, like, we'll have some guests. I want to get Lenny on here because one of my closest friends, and we've really reconnected in the past. But what he said to me really meant a lot. It made me think about how I like to tell stories, so being a storyteller, but how telling stories can help other people. And also, like, it being killing two birds with one stone, like, selfishly speaking, like, it can also help me process things. And it's so weird, me approaching 3 years now. I'm such a different fan than I used to be. And I love the Green Bay Packers. I always will. And I do miss, like, getting into that, that the shenanigans and the brouhaha. I do miss that. But I tell you what, I won't change what I have right now. How I think, how I act, how true I am to myself and how true I am to others. And I'm still working on that. Being more authentic, being more transparent up front with people. Instead of just people pleasing. Oh, I don't want this person to hate me, so I'm just going to do whatever they want to do so they don't hate me. Ugh, done with that. So I want to thank Ben Lenox, for sharing that story. It really, because I was done. And I told people, like, I'm done doing the podcast, and I could tell that they were like, man, I could hear it in their tone that that they missed the podcast, which, again, like, I felt like, all right, it was a duty of mine to come back, and we'll do a reformed, evolved podcast, and we'll see. We'll see if people like it. And if people don't like it, oh well. But at least I'll like myself when I'm talking, and at least I'll be honest. And so that's what we're going to do moving forward. And I want to thank Niebels and Ken. Niebels doing all the podcast editing and producing with Sonic Transformation. I mean, that is a thankless job. And I'm sure that, actually, I don't know what he's thinking. And Ken Ingalls being a co-host and being how busy he is and dedicated every week, I just thanking you, Ken, and thanking you, Niebels, and Jeremiah Wayman, the original co-host, and how we started this, and meeting so many other people along the way, really. So, now that I got that out, I just wanted to talk about that. And so now, let's talk about the Green Bay Packers. So it's been a while since you've heard me talk about the Green Bay Packers, and it's been a while since you've heard me talk about like my honest take on the Green Bay Packers. And we'll see, like, moving forward, like how honest, or not honest, but like how I guess open. So I'm always going to be honest, but I guess open, if you will. How open am I going to be about my true thoughts about the Green Bay Packers? And we'll see moving forward, but I was born and raised a Green Bay Packers fan. Growing up during the mid-'90s, the whole Favre era, and the Dallas Cowboys were America's team. I hated, I based my friendships off of like what people supported. Like, if they were a fair weather fan, if they liked the Dallas Cowboys, don't hang out with me. Get away from me. And that's how everyone I knew was either like a Jets fan or believe it or not, a Cowboys fan, a Niners fan. And I just firmly believe that if you were born in the state of Wisconsin, it was your right that you had to support Wisconsin sports. And to each their own. Like, there are Green Bay Packer fans all across the world, and go Pack, go. I'm not going to be that person that you have to live 0.7 miles away from Lambeau Field in order to be a true Green Bay Packer fan. I'm not going to be that. But me growing up, that's what I thought. So I was born in Appleton, Wisconsin, hour or so south of Green Bay, and my grandfather had season tickets. He sat there in the Ice Bowl. And this is one of those stories he was at the Ice Bowl. And the same seats that we sit in today, me and my cousins and my sister, we share these seats. Same seats today. And as I was growing up, my dad being a huge Green Bay Packers fan, and so obviously it was proximity. But a story that I've just been opening it up a little bit more. Like, I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, professional networking. So I've been sharing a little bit more on that. And the story is that I just want to make sure. Yep, that microphone, that would be weird. So I was telling the story so my dad was born, or he actually was born hearing, and had scarlet fever, and it blew out his eardrums. And they think he was like a couple of weeks old when he became deaf. And he grew up in an area, Clintonville, Wisconsin. Let's look it up. A small town, very religious community. I think Lutheran. And back then, and maybe in some twisted way now, but back then, it was sins of the father. Like, if your child had a disability or whatever, differences, it was sins of the father. Like, the father was the reason why that their son was deaf. So my grandparents were ashamed because that's what they believed in. And in that town, that's what people believed in. So they sent my father away to this oral school in Green Bay. And he had he always said fake mom, that was the sign, fake mom. So stepmother, but he was raised by another stranger. So messed up. And I don't really know a lot about that time, and I don't know when he came back to my grandparents and his brothers, but he was sent off to Green Bay to this oral school. Cause back then sign language was considered this awful thing. They would slap hands. They considered it like a primate thing, like a barbaric thing. So sign language and deaf culture, all that stuff, it was so looked down upon. People were vilified. It was awful. And that's why it became my life's mission to spread more awareness about the vibrant and wonderful culture that is the deaf community and sign language. Me being a sign language interpreter and now wanting to be more of an advocate and ally. But my dad, he would get bullied at this oral school. And so he'd seek refuge. And by seeking refuge, what he would do is he'd run across. So there's there's the Oral School, and then there was City Stadium or City Field, City Stadium, now known as Lambeau Field. And seeking refuge, he would run over to where the Packers practiced. And he did that for a while. Hold on, I'm going to stop this one. Dehumidifier. Oh, sorry about that. It's another beautiful thing about it. You just do whatever you want to do, you know? But so my dad would go to these Green Bay Packer practices and seek refuge so he wouldn't be bullied. And how he got bullied is, you know, he'd have hearing aids. And so they were awful. They'd rip off his hearing aids and they'd slap him in the face. So you get where, like, I get why my dad was so angry. And I get why my dad, like, it wasn't right, but I get why he got so frustrated with me and he beat me. He didn't have that understanding. He didn't have that world knowledge. He didn't have that access. I believe it or not, I forgive him. But anyway, so he would go to these Green Bay Packer practices, and the great Marv Fleming was one that my dad actually, like, they were friends. And so this deaf kid, my dad, would go to these practices, and after a while, like, Packer players would be like, who's this kid? And apparently my dad would, like, grab the footballs and give them to, like, the players. And so he became an extension of the Green Bay Packers organization and became an extension of the practices. And so then my dad would teach these players sign language. And that's how he became a Green Bay Packers fan. Believe that. And so it's my duty, like, really, I believe, to continue on that. Like, the Green Bay Packers gave my father an opportunity to feel included. And they looked at him not as less than. They made him feel like a superstar. And I don't even know if the Green Bay Packers, like, know. Obviously, they don't know this, but. So that's how my dad became a Green Bay Packers fan. And, like, coincidentally enough, like, my dad's dad, my grandfather, had season tickets because in that area. But why my dad loved the Green Bay Packers was because those Packer players befriended him. And that's why sports has such a huge ripple effect. And I don't know if, like, people are like, oh, just sports. But in my head, when people just say just sports, this is what I gravitate towards. The positive impact sports has on people. And this also ties into, like, I wanted to add, like, why I, like, had to take a step back is because, like, I also was having, like, meetings with the Green Bay Packers about, like, accessibility, and nothing moved forward with that. And I became really angry and jaded. And almost like, how dare they, like, and then I just realized, like, it is what it is, you know? You've got teams like the Milwaukee Bucks, and maybe the Packers will come around, but I'll still be a fan. That was another thing that I had to deal with. So I'm doing this podcast, but at the same time I'm working in sports, and I'm just seeing all these, like, inaccessibility. In 2022, I've got a good feeling about American Sign Language in sports. I've got a really good feeling about accessibility in sports. But man, it's been a grind. It's been a hustle. And again, like, when I was doing the podcast, like, that's 10 hours a week. It's eaten up into my, creating this business. So again, that's why I, like, want to do, like, I just want it to be more free form, more just kind of just chatting, talking. And so with my father, I'll wrap that up. That's why my dad became a sports fan. So when I was born, like, there was no question, like, I was a Green Bay Packers fan. And it's been a part of my identity. And so you then start working with them, or thinking that you're going to work with them and then nothing happening, at least now or then, you have this, at least for me, I had this like existential like crisis, and like, wow, like a lot of my identities are like intertwined with the Green Bay Packers. So I had to take a step back. And just being on Twitter and like, you know, especially with the whole Rodgers and COVID-19 thing, and like it was just like, I just want to watch the Green Bay Packers, and I just want to have fun watching sports again. And that's what I needed, to just take a break and not talk about the Green Bay Packers. And I think beforehand, I would have pushed through. Been like, all right, just got to keep on doing it. But I knew right then and there that I had to take a break like that. And that's the blessing and the curse of anxiety and depression, is that it can just happen. And I've gotten better at like coping mechanisms and like how to deal with it. But I tell you what, I've been like open with like people who I've felt like I was closer with, and maybe we're growing apart. I'm not sure. But I've been more open. And you can just tell, like, as I've become more vulnerable and open, there are people that don't want to hear it. There are people that like minimize it. There are people that are like, oh man, like, you know, what's, you know, Debbie Downer or anything like that. Like, and like, I just love how it's a female, like Debbie Downer, you know what I mean? All sexism about that, but like, so that's what's been going on. And this feels really good. Like, you know, just getting it out there. And it's funny because I said I was going to talk about the Green Bay Packers, and I did, but like you probably thought I was going to talk about the Green Bay Packers like right now, like the game coming up on Saturday. And this is where we would say like, hey, we're going to take a quick commercial break, and we'll be right back. But I'm just going to go to the bathroom, and I'll be right back. Okay. And for podcast, and we are back with the second half. And so, yeah, that's been what's going on. And moving forward, I'm going to talk a little bit more about like pxpsports interpreting and like my intent and like my goals and my dreams and what I want to make sports more accessible. And I'm not going to take it so personal. But again, like when I proposed to the Milwaukee Bucks back in 2019, so like September of 2019, I had a accessibility meeting with the Milwaukee Bucks, Pfizer Forum. And right at the end of the meeting, I had mentioned something that I had been thinking about for a while of what do you think about having a sign language interpreter for a post-game interview with Coach Bud? And then you would become the first team in professional sports history to have a sign language interpreter. And at the time, I didn't really realize like how big of a thing that was, because now, like, you know, I created PXP Sports Interpreting from there, and it's been a grind. You know, I thought there'd be another team, and it hasn't been. And obviously the pandemic totally changed everything. Financially speaking, teams are more frugal. survival now. And that's something that I've just had to accept. But when the Bucks were like, yes, we're going to do this, I was like 7-8 months sober at that time. Like I was a baby during that time. And I was also teaching at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. I had just started teaching. And again, I started teaching because it looked good on a resume. I figured, oh, Brice is also a teacher and an interpreter and the Bucks interpreter. And again, there's that shame of like you're doing things for attention. And that's, again, what I struggled with about coming back and doing this podcast again. Was that in reality, there is some form of, attention, like when you're doing a podcast, but I don't want that anymore. I just want to talk about like what's on my mind, and honestly, like almost like not like a therapy session, like, but allow it to sort of cleanse, get things off my mind, talk about things. And I hope you enjoy it. And if not, I get it. I get it. And I'm going to talk about, just different aspects of my life. And because one, it just feels good to talk about it. And two, like I've realized that I have a story to tell. I have a unique story of also forgiveness. Like I could, my dad used to pummel me. He used to say awful things to me too. And you would think that like, because a deaf person did that to me, that why would I ever want to work like with deaf people? Just part of who I am. It's part of my fabric. That's another thing that like, despite all that trauma, I still want to be a part of the deaf community. And I want to spotlight on the deaf community more. And it feels so fucking weird because I'm talking about them and they don't have access to that. And that's another thing that I'm going to talk about, like moving forward, is like how we take things for granted. And I'm not saying that we should pity people to make ourselves feel better. You know what I mean? Where we see someone in a wheelchair and go, oh my gosh, like I'm so glad I have legs, or like I can walk. Like that's even more degrading. Like what I want is for people to recognize what sort of privilege they have and how can they support their brothers and sisters. We're all human beings. And at least in my vantage point, that's gotten lost. It's gotten lost. Who's vaccinated? Who's unvaccinated? Liberal, conservative. It's all divisive. And I'm vaccinated, full disclosure, because I want to help people. I don't want to get sick and I don't want to get others sick. It's so weird that we've lost sight at like how our species has thrived communally. We thrive because we stuck together. And so maybe that might be an extension or a branch. It's talking about how like we can be better servants of one another. You know? I don't know if you've had this yerba mate. It's like Blueforia. It's this blueberry juice yerba mate. So yerba mate is like a caffeinated drink. It's another, caffeine plant. It's like a fun caffeinated buzz, a little bit more alert. But when I was moving that along, all that other stuff. But, and I'm going to do that, going to jump around a little bit here and there. So bear with me. But I was, in 2019, like right when I quit drinking, my wife and I went to Paris. And that was like a big challenge for me of like, shit, like I'm going to be in Paris, like, wine and all this stuff. And that was actually the first time where I was like, I think I can do this. But we had a stopover in Helsinki. Yeah, Helsinki, Finland. So we had like a, I don't know, like a 26, 28 hour stopover. And we were exhausted. So we really didn't like check out Helsinki that much. Reminded me of Baraboo for some reason. Like Baraboo, Wisconsin Dells, like all the, the Devil's Lake, like mountains and pine trees, all that stuff. But on the flight, like what, Finnair, whatever, Finland Air, I think it's Finnair. They had this blueberry juice. It was amazing. And so I've been like searching for that kind of blueberry juice. Like you can order it, but it's like $150. It's ridiculous. And I'm not going to do that. So I get my blueberry fix from this yerba mate, and there's some caffeine in it. So yeah, this feels good. Just talk about like whatever's going on and all that stuff. So yeah, let's, we're about 55 minutes in. Let's wrap up with some Packers talk. Packers are 13-4. I even said I wasn't going to do X's and O's and all that stuff, but I guess, and maybe that's not even X's and O's, but 13-4, and they play the San Francisco 49ers, the boogeyman, this Saturday night. I think it's like 7:30 p.m. Central Standard Time is kickoff, or 7:15. The reason why I like toggle back and forth is I have to work. Like the Bucks play the Kings Saturday night. So I'm gonna have to game plan how, like, if I'm gonna record the game and then like just I don't know how that's gonna work out. But there's a good shot that I'm gonna miss some, if not all, of the Packers game on Saturday. I can't believe it. But in the past, I would have been distraught. Like it would have ruined my whole week. Like, don't talk to me. Can't watch the Packer game on Saturday. So at least I've got that. I'm a little bit more secure now. It sucks. But with that, and looking on Twitter and having some conversations with other buddies that are Packer fans, man, people are spooked about playing the San Francisco 49ers. Interesting. And I get it. I mean, I get why we're spooked. I mean, I think the 49ers are like 8-2 in their last 10 games. They've been on a roll. Deebo Samuel is, talk about a revelation. Talk about like that hybrid player role. He's so fun to watch. Man, I was such a big fan of him coming out of college. Like he lit it up in the Senior Bowl. I think he went to South Carolina. I think he's a Gamecock. And I love the way he plays. And you got George Kittle, you got Elijah Mitchell, who's I'm pretty sure a rookie from like Louisiana Lafayette, 6th-rounder. So I think he had like a little under 100 yards and a touchdown. But he had like 27 carries. Deebo had like 10 carries, like 70-some yards. And I don't have an agenda. Like now and like moving forward, like my only agenda was to talk about why I did the abrupt like pull the plug, and then talk a little bit about like what's going on with me and other things. I just want to get on and I just want to talk about the Packers and talk about whatever in general, like what's going on. I mean, I talked about blueberry juice, but I was reading a little bit about the Packers, Niners, and yeah, like Samuel, Mitchell, George Kittle, like they concern me. We'll see about Bosa and his concussion, Fred Warner and his ankle injury. That looked bad. Like the way he was like writhing in pain, that looks so bad. But looks like he's going to be coming back. And so I get why people are spooked. In the 90s, the Packers finally like were a team to reckon with because they beat the Niners in 95, 96 season. I get all those mixed up. But they beat they beat the Niners in Candlestick. That was like that first play with Wayne Simmons and Craig Newsom picked up the fumble, and then Packers jumped out to like a 21-0 lead, and then like I think Steve Young threw like 60 some times in that game and tried to rally back. That was like, yeah, it was like the 95, and then we ended up losing to the Cowboys. The next game after that, the Cowboys ended up going to the Super Bowl and winning. And then the following year, we made it to the Super Bowl and won. But that, like, beating the Niners then, I remember, like, in 7th grade, like, I had a chip on my shoulder. I was always ticked off that everyone was like, oh, you're a Packer fan now, but I know that you rooted for the Cowboys. And I remember, like, I vividly remember, like, how I felt, like, after they won, like, all right. And then, like, I think that, like, that was the Haskell game, afterwards where, he got hit and, like, hit his head, like, and, like, Jerkovich got, like, chop blocked from behind. I think that was the game. And we just couldn't take care of business with the Cowboys. And then the next year, the Cowboys lost to the Panthers, and then we beat the Niners, and that was that mud game where I think Edgar Bennett had a couple touchdowns, like 80-some yards. The mud game, I just remember Edgar Bennett covered him and we trounced him. It was like 35-14. And then we beat him again the following year. And then we lost to Terrell Owens, Steve Young, Terrell Owens. And then we won, like, I think in 2001, 2002 again. I think that was like Garcia. Yeah, Garcia was the quarterback. So that was 4-1. And then, so we jumped out to a 4-1 lead in the postseason against the Niners. And then now it's 4-4. That's what the series, we're knotted up at 4-4. And the last 3 times that we faced the Niners in the playoffs, we've lost. And 2019, Coach LaFleur's first year, the whole, like, going up against, Shanahan and his brother, and, like, and they just got, I mean, they kind of made it a game. I think it was like 37-20. And they just got ran out, right at the beginning. Ran out, embarrassed. And so I get why people are like, oh, we're playing the Niners. Oh. But it's a different LaFleur, in my opinion. Rodgers is better than Garoppolo, albeit, though, like in 2019, Rasheem Mostert had like 290 yards and 4 touchdowns. And I think Garoppolo only threw like 8 times. So I could see the same thing again. Garoppolo doesn't turn the ball over. They ground and pound. But we're such a better team. Such a better team. And that was LaFleur's first year as head coach. Yeah, it was like, 2019, 2020. So this is his 3rd year. I'm getting all with the pandemic, like all the years kind of blend together. And then last year we had no fans, and then Tampa Bay got out to a big lead again. So that's where I'm really focused on. And Jeremiah Wayman, my other brother from another mother, original co-host, I tweeted out and said, yes, the San Francisco 49ers game is concerning, especially with Debo and Elijah Mitchell. But colder temperatures, better quarterback, I think you give the slight edge to the Green Bay Packers. And Jeremiah mentioned something like, get out to a fast start. And I think that's huge. I think when LaFleur and company, when the Packers have lost under LaFleur, when they've lost bad. And I think that will be indicative. Like, what happens, like, the first couple of possessions, first couple of play, like, do we get the ball first? Do they jump out to a lead? Like, it just seems that LaFleur will, and I say this respectfully, like, will panic. And maybe, like, if they get down early, he might panic a little bit and try to, overcompensate maybe. But starting off early, like get humming. And I think AJ Dillon, like that's why you drafted him in the second round. It's going to be colder temperatures. Wear that defense down, ground and pound. Like this is AJ Dillon game. It's got AJ Dillon written all over it. And personally, I just want to make sure I'm going to type something real quick. Just see like what's going on with AJ Dillon. Okay. Yeah, the last thing I want to do is talk about AJ Dillon, like him be, inactive or something like that. But this seems like an AJ Dillon type of game, and then like this postseason just seems to be AJ Dillon time. And for me, the way I'm thinking about it is AJ Dillon and Devontae Adams. Find a way to ground and pound with Dillon, like over, like don't like run the ball. Like I don't want Rodgers going back into the pocket and just airing it out, like playing hero ball. I want Dillon like demoralizing the Niners, wearing them down. And then also finding a way to get the ball into Devontae's hands. They will not be able to stop him. They'll only be able to contain him. So he's going to eat. Going to eat. And it looks like the Packers we're getting back to being full strength. You get Jair back, Zadarius back, David Bakhtiari's back. Let's see something real quick. Yeah. And then, and you get Whitney Merciless back. And so they're looking at possibly Zadarius Smith, Jair Alexander, and Whitney Merciless coming back. Those are some big key additions. And obviously we'll have to temper our expectations with them. For some reason, and I don't know, I've got just this weird feeling about the Packers defense. They've kind of been trending in a different direction, how they started off. But you got Devondre Campbell in the middle, all-pro Devondre Campbell. You've got a secondary. I mean, Rasul Douglas. I was a little scared. I mean, what he's done is incredible. But when people were crowning him, after the pick 6 against the Cardinals, I was like, okay, easy. Let's temper expectations. But it's crazy. If you line his statistics up this year with Charles Woodson when he won Defensive Player of the Year in, I think, 2009, almost identical. And I'm not saying Rasul Douglas is future Hall of Famer, but what he's doing this year is special, elite. So I think Rasul Douglas and, he'll allow Jair Alexander to kind of get back into the swing of things. And let's see what happens with Eric Stokes, him being a rookie, cold weather. Think about it. It's going to be cold game. So also tempering your expectations with rookie Eric Stokes. You just don't have to worry about like Kevin King snafus from last year. Was it Mike Evans and then Scotty Miller? But yeah, that's kind of like it's going to be a grind. This divisional round, the conference championship, and then the Super Bowl, it's going to be a grind. Getting a trophy is not easy. And I parallel it to like the Milwaukee Bucks this past year when they won the championship. Everyone's freaking out when we faced the Nets after the Miami Heat in the second round. And granted, if Kevin Durant has smaller shoes, they advance probably, but we just need to give that sort of story a rest. But everyone was freaking out about the Nets, and Bucks prevailed and slugged it out. down 2-0, came back, won the series. Went toe-to-toe with Atlanta. That was another slugfest. Thought Giannis was done for the season. Comes back. Bucks secure their place in the finals off of Brook Lopez and Drew Holiday and Chris Middleton without Giannis. And then in the championship, in the finals against the Suns, they were down 2-0, and they came back and won. Bucks in 6. I think we're going to see the same thing. It's going to be tough, and it's not supposed to be easy. But I do get a kick out of people being like, I don't want to face the San Francisco 49ers. I don't want to face them. Like, I mean, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are for real. The Rams are for real. I mean, the way they just dismantled Atlanta. I mean, Atlanta's just – or Arizona. Man, Arizona, though. Wow. They just beelined it. So all these teams left are good. I mean, on the NFC side. Same with the AFC, but Tampa Bay, Rams, Niners, and Packers, they're all legit teams. So whoever they face, like, you just got to go out there and take care of business. And if you want to win the Super Bowl, bring back the Lombardi Trophy, you're going to have to beat the best of the best. And it doesn't matter who you face, you just have to win. So that's just got to be the mindset. Just go in and take care of business. You've got the number 1 seed at home with those fans. Cold temperatures. This could be Rodgers' last hurrah as a Green Bay Packer. I'm not trying to start stuff or instigate stuff, but, you know, they brought the band back together for this. Another shot at the Super Bowl after last year coming so close in the NFC Championship game and having Tampa Bay, having Tom Brady and the Buccaneers go out and win again. LaFleur has now had 3. This is his 3rd postseason. He's equipped, knows what to expect, and you got to think that he wants to stick it to Kyle Shanahan, especially over, you know, the story that leaked out during the draft where Mike LaFleur, his brother, and Robert Saleh, I think that's how you pronounce his last name, with the Jets, where, like, they were talking to Kyle Shanahan, and Shanahan was saying, hey, you better draft your guy, or they were saying you better draft your guy, something to that effect. And Kyle Shanahan said, we haven't done any research. And hold on, let's I want to get this story. Oh, man. It's just littered with, that's what the talk is about their relationship. Anyway, based off of my memory, it was something to the effect of, since the Jets were taking 2 and I think the Niners were taking 3, Shanahan said, you better take your guy. We haven't done much research on Zach Wilson or whatever. And Mike LaFleur said, you've already got your quarterback. And Kyle Shanahan said, what are you talking about? And he's like, is that why your brother's not returning my phone calls? Your brother, Matt LaFleur. And Mike LaFleur goes, I don't blame him. Yeah, this is all, I mean, who knows if this is true or not, but this is what was reported out. And then the Packers and Niners, when they played earlier this season, that cold, like, at the end of the game, like, there was nothing cordial about that. Like, LaFleur beat the Niners, and there was no hand. I mean, it was just a walk by. And LaFleur's, a cordial dude, very personable. He wanted nothing to do with Kyle Shanahan there. And I'm sure vice versa. I mean, from what it looks like, Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch and the Niners tried to pry Aaron Rodgers from the Green Bay Packers, and say what you will. Maybe Aaron Rodgers tried to get a trade or something to the 49ers. Who knows? I know there's some people that firmly believe that, and they might be onto something. So you got to think, like, Shanahan went after LaFleur's guy and Rodgers. LaFleur wants to stick it to Shanahan, and especially when LaFleur lost to Shanahan in 2019. Or the 2019-2020 season. Yeah, so it was like the 2020, January 2020. That's right, because we beat the Seahawks and then we faced the Niners. So you got to think that LaFleur wants to stick it to Shanahan, and hopefully they just come in. Mindset's right, but you got the 1 seed. All roads lead to the Super Bowl. You got to go through Lambeau. This is what you wanted. You couldn't have written a better story than this right now. So, yes, I'm nervous, just because San Francisco they're hot, and in years past the hot team prevails. And San Francisco's a hot team right now. Snuck into the playoffs. Very similar to 2010 Packers, where they snuck into the playoffs and then started winning. So hopefully that doesn't turn out the same way for the Niners. But I get why people are nervous and spooked, and you have a right to. But at the same time, Green Bay Packers have been the best team in the NFL all season long. And granted, it's all about getting hot at the right time. They're rested. They're not too rested. They're getting players back. I feel good. As usual, I'm not going to give a prediction, but I feel good. And I feel good talking about this again. Talking about the Packers and talking about life and what's going on. And I hope everyone is safe and healthy. And, work's been crazy, and I hope to continue to do this. And I hope you like it. And if not, I get it. But I do think I'm going to continue doing this because it feels good to talk and kind of get it out and like talk therapy a little bit. And maybe moving forward, do like an ask me anything, maybe like a mailbag sort of thing where start interacting. But all right. Well, I hope everyone is well, safe, and healthy. And I hope you get to enjoy a Packers win this weekend. And until we meet again and chat again, I'm Brice Christianson, and this is the Unknown Packers Podcast.